So in the last module, we talked about product ideation, how to figure out what the heck are you going to sell. But once you've figured out what you're going to sell, how do you get it made? Where do you find it? Where do you find a manufacturer? So that's what we're going to talk about in this module. So when you're sourcing products, there's typically two different types of companies that you can go to. One of them might be the manufacturer themselves, and another one, which is a factory basically. The other one might be what's called a trading company. And so especially in China, there's a lot of companies that act as brokers. So there's a language barriers, there's cultural differences. So a lot of times the actual factories that are making the product don't actually want to deal with English speaking or European speaking people. They rather just deal with everything in Chinese and let someone else handle the in between. And so those are what's called trading companies. Trading companies are not necessarily a bad thing. They can be a good thing. Some cases they can be a bad thing because trading companies, some of them specialize in certain areas. Those are good trading companies. They specialize in just a single type of pet products. Those can be really good. But trading companies that have a wider range of things, they look like a Walmart store and everything from every category under the sun, those are probably not the ones that you want to deal with, just as a general rule of thumb. If you can go to the factory direct, that's always the best because then you're dealing with the factory, maybe even with the owner of the factory. You can create better relationships and get better terms and get higher priority. So whenever you can, go directly to the factory, but don't be afraid to use a trading company as long as they're highly specialized. And in some cases, that's the only type of company that you can use. Another thing that you can do is you can use websites, like Alibaba, like we talked about in the last one, or Global Sources. Those are two really good ones. There's several others out there, but those are the two big ones for international sourcing where you can go and you can just type in a keyword. I'm looking to make dog bowls, and you'll get a list of all the factories that make dog bowls. And you can see which ones may have something that's similar to what you like, and you reach out to them through that platform, and you can negotiate and get pricing and everything from them. But another thing you can use are what's called sourcing agents. Sourcing agents are one of my particular favorite ways to do it because they take a lot of the pain out. They do all the dirty work. And some of the sourcing agents work on a straight hourly rate, so they just charge you based on the hour or based on the project, a flat fee. Other ones work on a percentage of what you order. So they kind of act as a go-between. So all your orders go through them, and then they take a little cut off the backside. That doesn't mean, though, that you're paying more in most cases, but that just means that they can still often get you a better price if you go to direct because they speak the language, they know the culture, they know the customs, and they just take it off. You might be paying $1 a unit going direct, and then maybe they can get it for 95 cents because they know how to negotiate or know the language or have relationships. And then out of that 95 cents, they're taking their 10 cents. So they're really paying 85 cents, but they're making 10 cents and you're still saving over what you would have saved and go direct. So that's okay. There's companies like Zignify, which is one of my favorite ones to use, Zignify. They do a really good job. I personally use them and for actually helping you source products, whether that be in China or Turkey or Mexico or India, Vietnam, anywhere in the world, that they work on an hourly rate. So some people are a little bit turned off by that, but because there might be a little bit more upfront fee. It might take them, let's say, 15 hours to really source a product really well for you. So that might cost $1,000. And other people are like, I don't want to pay that $1,000. I'd rather pay a commission or something. But you oftentimes in sourcing, you get what you pay for. If you want, there's other ones in the hub.helium10.com. You can find all kinds of other resources for sourcing as well if you're looking for some other options. And the good thing about, like, if you're going to source through Alibaba is Helium 10 has a partnership with Alibaba. So when you're using the X-ray tool and you're doing your research on Amazon, there's a little button up in the top where you just hit that little button that says Alibaba, and it'll actually take you to Alibaba and show you results. It'll automatically do a search for you and show you the results of similar products to what's showing up in your X-ray. So that can be a really good, cool little quick shortcut as well. Another place is websites. You can just Google private label manufacturer XYZ product name, private label manufacturer slow feed dog bowls, and oftentimes you'll come up with a whole range of different companies. And you can use other sites like AliExpress or 1688 or Global Sources. There's tons of of sourcing sites out there. Ewu Go that we talked about in the last one. Trade shows are good as well. Some of the directories where you can find out where trade shows are around the world for different categories are like 10 times, 10 times, TIMES.com, or TSNN also has a list of like trade shows that are all over the world. There's U.S. shows, like we mentioned in the last module, ASD, Source Direct, which happens in Vegas a couple times a year, plus individual trade shows like I said, the Cosmoprof or the Pet Expos, or there's trade shows for basically every industry. And sometimes you don't even have to go to those trade shows. You can just look at their website, and usually they'll have an exhibitor directory on their website. And sometimes you can actually find links to the exhibitors, and they'll show you what they manufacture. It might even have a phone number or an email or a link to that exhibitor's website. So you can do a lot of this work sitting from home at your computer if you don't want to actually get out and actually walk the aisles a lot of times. The Ewu market is another place. It's YIWU. That's a year-round marketplace in China that you can visit. And there's like 7 buildings and 4 floors per building and little 10 by 10 stalls of all kinds of stuff there. It can be a great place to do some sourcing. The Canton Fair can be an option if it's twice a year in October and April. That can be a place if you want to go and do some sourcing. I'm not a huge fan of the Canton Fair from a sourcing. That's for ideas, but I like to go there and get ideas and then talk to meet the manufacturers and the factories and say, let's go to your factory. I want to see what's there. That's where the real juicy stuff is going to be that everybody else is not seeing. Online directories like IndiaMart or the Thomas Directory can be good sources. Thomas Directory has a lot of U.S. suppliers. These used to be big, heavy books that you had to go to the library. I used to have to do that years and years ago and search through these big, old, heavy, like encyclopedias. Now it's all online, and you can do really good sourcing that way. You can also reverse engineer what other people are doing. So there's websites like Panjiva or Import Dojo where you pay a fee, and they monitor all the bill of ladings or the BOLs. Everything that comes into the United States that's imported has to have a manifest. So if it's coming in on a ship, on a cargo ship, it has to have this manifest of what's being brought in. That is, in the United States, that's public information. It's not true in Europe, but in the United States, that's public information. And so there's websites that scrape that data, and they for a fee, they allow you to access it. But one is free called Import Genius. And if you go to Import Genius, you can actually there do 3 searches, and you can see what your competition is bringing in. So you can, for example, if you look on Amazon, it says sold by, Kevin's Pet Supplies. You click on that, it'll take you to a page on Amazon where it has the seller's, the factory's name. It might be King Industries, Austin, Texas. And so then you type in King Industries into Import Genius, and it'll show you everything that they brought in, how much they brought in, what the weight of it was, where the factory was, or the trading company. And so you can do reverse engineer stuff that way as well. You can also find stuff on your own by going over to China and just hiring a local guide and going to the markets. There's cities in China that specialize in toys or specialize in electronics or specialize in beauty. And just going place to place with a local guide can also be a great way to do some sourcing. Now, when you're doing sourcing, you always want to ask the factory a lot of questions. So you always want to know their size, how long they've been in business, what's their actual capacity, how many workers do they have, are they actually the company, do they own it? So you always want to do a little bit of vetting. Alibaba and some of those websites will do some of that for you, but you always want to ask some basic questions. Anytime you manufacture, you always want to do what's called inspections. So inspections are where you inspect the goods before you make final payment. So typically when you buy something out, especially out of China, it's usually 30% down and 70% when it's ready to ship. So when you place the order, you've decided on exactly what the cost is, you've negotiated everything, you'll give them 30%, they'll make the product, and then before they ship it, they'll tell you everything's ready, it's in the boxes, ready to go onto the ship or the plane to come over. You'll pay the other 70%. Now that's all negotiable over time. Typically on your first order, you're probably going to have to do that, but as you build relationships, you can change those terms up and get better terms, and sometimes even pay 60 days after it comes to the United States. Just depends on your supplier, especially if you go over to China and actually visit your supplier. But you always want to do an inspection, and there's third-party inspection companies like Asia Inspections or Topwin, or there's several that will actually send out people to the factory, and they will take a random sample of the finished products and test them. They'll weigh them, they'll smell them, they'll drop them on the floor, they'll test to make sure the batteries work, everything. And you want to always do that no matter what before you pay that final bill. Because even if you've done 10 orders with this factory, you still want to do an inspection because they will cut corners. So never, never, ever not do an inspection. These will cost you $150 to $300, and they're well worth the money. You get this big PDF report that shows you everything. And so inspections are critical. I've had people that somebody I recommended a factory to one time. So they said, Kevin, who should I do this with? And I said, oh, this would be a good factory. Then I go, okay, cool. So they negotiated a price. They made the product with this factory, and then they didn't do the inspection. They figured, well, Kevin recommended them. They must be okay. And they didn't do the inspection. The product arrives to the United States. It's a disaster. Things are broken. Things don't work. They end up losing a lot of money. Always, 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 without fail, do an inspection. Never skip that step. Ever skip that step, because they will cut corners. There's a book called Poorly Made in China that you might want to read. You can get it on Amazon. It'll show you the whole culture and the whole process of how these factories cut corners. So it's Poorly Made in China is the name of that book. Always get samples before you do anything and compare the samples. Ask them for samples. If you're doing something unique and brand new, they should create a prototype for you. Like I was doing some unique slow feed dog bowls. And so I found the factory I said, I'm going to send you over the STD and the 3D files that I had my designer make. I want you to print a little 3D printed sample for me with the materials that you guys are using, just so I can see it. And they might charge you a small fee for that. That's okay. And if you ask for samples, they may charge you a fee too, because they just don't want everybody calling and saying, hey, I'm thinking about working with you. Can you send me a sample of your product? And people are just looking for free products. So they might charge you, and they got to ship it. So by FedEx or DHL, it costs a bit of money. So samples, in a lot of cases, expect to pay. You could just pay for that by PayPal or something. It's pretty safe. You don't have to worry about that. But they just expect to pay for some samples, and it might cost you a few $100 if you're checking out different factories and just sampling costs just to get them in. You can also do things where you buy your competition on Amazon to get samples. So I would get samples from the factory and also buy your top 2 or 3 or 4 competitors' products on Amazon and see how they're packaging and see how their product actually looks, not just based on the photos, but what does it look like. You can also visit the factories. If you're able to make it over to Mexico or China or Vietnam or wherever, visiting a factory oftentimes gets you better deals, gets you a higher priority. Face-to-face culture is big in China. And so if you can go over there and have a beer with them and eat dinner with them and visit their factory, they really, really appreciate that. And it's something that can go a long ways in helping your cash flow and helping you work together as a team. So anytime you're able to do that, I would recommend you do that. There are supplier blacklists out there that you can Google Chinese supplier blacklists where people have reported issues. So it's a good idea to always check those blacklists just to make sure the factory you're thinking about working with is not on one of those blacklists. Most of you and most of the world still uses China as of right now as their major manufacturing hub, just because China is just so well set up for it. All the wheels are greased, everything just works like a charm. But there are other options out there. There's like Mexico, Indonesia, Turkey, Vietnam, India. There are other options. It's a little bit more, it's not quite as well oiled as a process, but it could still be great options, and you can avoid a lot of tariffs because a lot of stuff coming in from China has an extra 25%. They call it the Trump tariff that Trump added. So you might pay a small import duty of a few percentage points depends on the product to more, and then on top of that another 25% if it's coming from China. But if it's coming from India or Vietnam or Mexico, you don't have to pay that. So sometimes, even though the price might be a little bit higher in one of those other marketplaces, the price per unit from the factory, the total price once you factor in all the taxes and fees could be lower. So it's good to look at those. Why would you even look at India or somewhere like that? Because sometimes the MOQs, the minimum order quantity, are low. They're really good in handcrafted stuff. They speak English. Most of them speak English already. They're really good and sustainable and eco-friendly. the labor costs. China's labor costs have kind of skyrocketed because as their economy has gotten better and there's much more people in the middle class, the labor has gotten more expensive. So in places like Vietnam or India, the labor is still much cheaper. Places like India are aligned with Western values, so that can be something good as well. And the best thing is there's no trade tariffs on it. Things that you might look at for other places outside China could be things like handcrafted items or metal or glass or bamboo, wood-based items. Textiles are good. Things cotton or organic materials are good. Apparel, eco-friendly things. So you don't just think you have to use China. There's really good other options. And there are people, just like there's people that lead trips to the Canton Fair in China, there's people that lead trips to India. It will kind of hold your hand. There's several of them out there. You can see some of those on Helium 10 or listen to the AM/PM podcast or the Serious Sellers podcast. A lot of times they come on as guests, and you can find them there. You can also find, like I said before, you can find suppliers through Google, and for India or for other countries by just typing in, private label XYZ product name India or Vietnam or whatever. There's also trade shows, just like there is the Canton Fair in China. Like India has like the Delhi Fair. There's exporting councils. There's even people that will pay for your trip to India. There's a fellow that will actually pay. You pay $999, so basically $1,000 US, and that covers your airfare, your hotel for 7 days. You can get to meet factories. You get to go see the Taj Mahal. They cover this whole thing because they're trying to encourage trade. So there's lots of those kinds of things that are out there that can be really beneficial for you as well. So when you're vetting a supplier, when you found somebody, hey, I think they're going to be, these guys are going to work, you want to verify them. So you want to verify them via GST or their IEC codes. So these are codes that show that they're legit, that they're an actual factory, they have a license. Make sure that they actually have an export license. There are some factories that are not allowed to export. They're allowed to make products internally within, like, say, China, but they're not allowed to export. They don't have an export license. So a lot of times those companies might make something and then they have to go through their buddy that has an export license. So you end up having this two-step process. So it's best to deal with someone that has an export license. So always ask and make sure they can do that. Once you've decided on a factory, you want to make a specification sheet that's very detailed. Like you want to go into the minute detail on exactly what materials everything's made of, diagrams, a very, very detailed spec sheet. Don't just say, hey, I want 100 of these and just change the color. You got to be very specific. Which color is it? It's PMS 185, Pantone matching system 185. It's this type of aluminum. It's this type of silver. It's this type of thread. It's 65% polyester, 35% cotton. Whatever it is, you got to be very, very specific on everything. And usually that's done like in either a request for bid or it's done in an Excel sheet. A lot of these factories will do Excel sheets and send it back to you. Just make sure every little detail is listed in there. And if you can put pictures of it, it's a picture of the insert card, the picture of the box, all those kind of things are good to put in there. So when you're going to pay these guys, a lot of people are like, well, what if I pay them and they rip me off? Well, you can use Alibaba has something called trade assurance. It's kind of like a brokerage where you pay to Alibaba. The factory knows that Alibaba's got your money. Alibaba keeps it in escrow until the order's done and you say everything is fine. Then they release it to the factory. So if you're concerned, you can use, and the factory has a deal with Alibaba, you can use an escrow service. I've never used that. It's called trade assurance. I've never used that. I'm usually pretty good at vetting the factories. For small orders, sometimes you can use PayPal. And PayPal can be, some factories will take it. Some, they get charged a fee, so they might add a few extra percentage to it. There's companies like Wise, WISE, where you can actually send money, so you don't have to actually go to your bank and set up a big international wire. You can go through companies like Wise, and they'll send stuff way cheaper. Your bank might charge you $30, $40 to send a wire transfer to from your bank in the U.S. to a factory in China. And sometimes you got to go, depending on the bank, sit down at the office and fill out paperwork. Sometimes you can do it online or you got to call in. But companies like Wise will let you do it all online, and they might charge you a $5 fee or something instead of a $30 or $40 fee. So those can be good options as well. You want to avoid Western Union. If someone says, can you use Western Union as the money? Maybe for a sample, it might be okay, but for any large amounts, don't do that. Always for large orders, use bank transfers and vet the suppliers. Make sure, that's legit. Just make them send you their business documents and their license and double check that online. You always want to ask about patents. The products that you're making, are there patents on this? If there are, what countries are they in? Some of them will be honest with you, some of them won't, but it's always good to ask and document that so that there is a problem. You can say, hey, look, I asked you about this. Always use that independent inspection company like I mentioned before. Always check for those certificates. Ask them to send them. Sometimes they'll fake them, so sometimes it's hard to tell, but at least you're asking for it. And there are ways to double check them. If you're using an importer or a 3PL, sometimes those guys can actually check those things for you or double check. One thing that you want to always avoid is undervaluing your imports. So sometimes to avoid paying taxes, maybe your item is $5. It's what you're actually paying the factory to make it. But when they make the invoice, and it's called a commercial invoice, and when they send that with your shipment with the shipping company, maybe they put that, oh, you only paid $2 for these, even though you really paid $5. And they put that you paid $2. And what that does is it reduces your tax when it comes to the United States. You don't have to pay as high. If it's a 25% Trump tariff, that can significantly reduce the amount of money you're having to come out of pocket for. Don't do that. If the customs catches you doing that, they have a look back period. They can go back years. They can come back and get you for everything. There's huge fines. They'll freeze your stuff, confiscate your stuff. Don't do that. Be honest. This is what it costs, and that's what you want to make sure that you're paying. Make sure that you also are in the right category when you're importing. There's different, it's called a HTS code, HTS in the United States. It's similar. China has a separate coding system that's a little bit shorter. The U.S. adds a few extra digits to it on the HTS code. The code that you use to classify your products to import can make huge differences. So your product could be like say it's a baby item made out of cotton, and it's also got a mirror inside of it for some reason. I don't know why, but it's got a mirror inside of it. Well, mirrors are one classification of products, and the clothing is another classification, and baby's another classification. So there's going to be different options on how do you import that. And there's rules about how much of the product, what percentage of the product is the mirror, and what percentage of it's the cotton. And the category that you pick can make a huge difference in your costs for importing. Sometimes your factory will have a recommendation for you. Sometimes the company that you're using to do all your imports and logistics will have a recommendation for you. Check and double check those, because it can make a big difference. There's also a company called Tariff Terminator that will actually check these for you. And they will, a lot of times they will spot problems. Someone's been importing for 2 years under the wrong code because that's what their factory said it should be, and it's cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars in extra taxes. So be careful on those codes. Make sure they're right. If you're worried about your factory knocking you off, you can do what's called an NNN agreement, which is a non-disclosure, non-compete agreement in China. You have to make those in China, so a U.S. document's not going to suffice legally. It's got to be done by a Chinese lawyer in China in that district. But those are things, if you're worried about that you can do. Most of them won't probably be willing to sign it unless you're a big client, your Apple or someone like that. Gifts can be, and acknowledging holidays in China are a big deal. So they give the little red envelopes with cash in them. Or if you can send chocolates or something from the U.S. that they can't get, or from Europe, to your factory, to your little rep. Usually you have a English-speaking, a lot of times they're young ladies that just got out of college that are English-speaking reps. If you can send them gifts or acknowledge them on the special holidays like Chinese New Year or Dragon Boat Day or all the Singles Day and all the different little holidays, that can go a long way. Respect is and face is very important in the Chinese culture. It's called a guangxi, and so it's saving face is something that's really huge over there. So keep that in mind as well. Understand that though, value the time of your supplier too. Don't be just peppering them with questions and asking them so much. But small talk, the right kind of small talk can go a long way. Also, if you also want to ask your factory, do you sell directly on Amazon? And if they do, that's a big red warning flag that maybe you don't want to deal with that factory. because they could undercut you at any time, or they could take your ideas and kind of modify them a little bit, or use your molds and compete against you. And so if the factory is selling direct, that's usually not a good thing. Also, you want to always negotiate any kind of damages. So if they ship you 1,000 units and you sell them on Amazon and you end up getting 13 returned. So if you end up ordering 1,000 units and say 13 of them get returned on Amazon because they're broken or some issue with the customer, you can put in agreements with your supplier that says, hey, you're responsible for all returns. They usually won't ask you to send them back. They might ask you to take pictures of them, but they'll give you a credit a lot of times on your next order. So if you take pictures of the returns and show them, hey, we had 13 out of these 1,000 that were no good, you basically are guaranteeing them. So when I place my next order, you'll give me credit for 13, knock that off the bill, or give me 13 extras in the production run. So those are some important things you want to look at. There's a lot of people, some of the biggest mistakes that people make when dealing with China and dealing with suppliers, or they have a fear of paying the supplier. Don't be afraid. There are a few bad apples here or there, but for the most part, you're safe, and especially if you're doing 30% down, 70% on delivery, and don't pay that 70% until it passes that inspection. And if it doesn't pass the inspection, I usually put it in my agreements saying, hey, you've got to pay the factory. You got to fix the problem that the inspectors found, and then they'll come back in a week and they'll reinspect randomly everything again. Don't let the factory do the inspection. It's got to be a random third-party person. They'll come back and randomly inspect again. The factory pays for that reinspection. I put that in my initial agreement. And so that makes them be on top of things a little bit better at the beginning. But don't be afraid to pay it. You can always withhold that 70%. And if worse comes to worse and they just refuse to fix the problem, you might be out that 30%, but that's hopefully that doesn't happen, and it's very rare that does. Make sure you're in compliance with everything. It's another big mistake people make is they neglect the compliance issue. Making sure if you get something that's Bluetooth, it's Bluetooth certified. If you're going to say this is something for an Apple product, Apple has licenses and deals on the little connectors, on the little Lightning connectors, and the little USB-Cs. Make sure that's actually right. Make sure all your toys and your materials compliance are in line. Otherwise, you could have stuff confiscated when it hits the border to come in. I would always recommend using a freight forwarder instead of trying to organize everything yourself. Some people are like, just fly to the airport and I'll go pick it up. No, you don't want to do that. You want to use a freight forwarder professional. There's lots of them out there, like Forskit. Barack is talking a little bit in this course about some additional tips for you for dealing with suppliers and for shipping. They're a really good freight forwarder. There's several other options out there. You can find more of them in the hub.helium10.com. You always want to try to also don't say you're a super small company. You always want to look bigger than you are to the Chinese suppliers. Sometimes it might just be you, but sometimes when you're negotiating, you can say, well, let me check with the boss. Let me check with, this sounds good, but I don't know if the boss is going to go for this. Let me get back to you tomorrow after I talk to the boss. The boss is you. You're just using that as a negotiating technique. So don't look small. Look like you're going to be a big client and get them excited to actually work for you. Always communicate clearly. Speak like you're speaking to a 6-year-old. You got to be very simple words, very clear. Don't assume anything. So all your communication needs to be concise. Don't ramble around. Just get to the point with clear, simple, easy language, and be very, very clear. Don't just say, I need you to fix the top part of this. Say, I need you to fix the top right corner 3 centimeters from the left and 7 centimeters down, and send them a picture, with a little circle around the item to fix. Be very, very clear on everything, because English is not their first language, and things can get lost in translation and cost you time and problems. Always respect the cultural differences. There are cultural differences, so be mindful of that. The payment terms are negotiable. Also, pricing is negotiable. Sometimes the pricing is not negotiable a whole lot. I mean, maybe a few cents. But a lot of times if you tell them, hey, I'm planning on doing 10,000 of these units this year, but this first order is for 1,000, they might give you the 10,000 unit price, even though you might not end up doing all 10,000. By negotiating that way and saying, hey, let's work together as a partner, let's make this good, sometimes you can get better pricing. There's lots of little things you can do. Always plan for the Chinese holidays. The biggest one is Chinese New Year, which usually happens around late January, early February every year. Pretty much everything shuts down for 2 to 3 weeks. So the workers quit, the factories quit, everything just completely shuts down. So you got to build that into your scheduling. There are other holidays like the Dragon Boat Festival. It's like a 3-day one. There's some other holidays throughout where basically the whole country shuts down. Like DHL, FedEx, they're not even shipping. Everything is just closed. So you got to factor that in. And then after those holidays, especially like the Chinese New Year, a lot of times the factory has major turnover. People don't come back from the village. They go from the big cities out to see their family in the rural areas, and they don't come back. So you have turnover. And so right after a Chinese New Year, you can have a lot more issues with products because there's new people working on the line. So that's when you want to make sure you're really up to date on all your inspections and everything. I would also recommend you have a backup factory. So have the main factory that you use, but just in case something goes wrong, it gives you negotiating skill, and you have a backup factory that you could go to. Sometimes people get micromanage the packaging. Unless you're doing big orders or you're doing something really unique on the packaging, you just let your factory handle the packaging. Tell them what you want and design it, but let them work with their buddy down the street. And they may mark it up a little bit, but it's just easier than you going, well, I'm just going to get my own packaging to save $75. And it's the hassle of doing it, and you got to coordinate all that. So that's a mistake that a lot of people make. Don't push the price too low. If you negotiate too hard or too low, they're going to start cutting corners. They're going to take this zipper from an aluminum zipper to a plastic zipper and not tell you. It's still going to look like it's aluminum because they're going to paint it silver. Or they're going to cut corners. So don't push too low. Quality is more important than the absolute lowest price. Make sure the quality meets your requirements more so than getting the absolute lowest price. And always emphasize long-term partnerships. Long-term partnerships and mutual goals. Sometimes I know there's people that will share their projections. They'll send their spreadsheets like, look, here's what we're projecting. I'm telling you that we're going to order 10,000 of these. Let me show you. Here's our plan that me and my partners made. And let's work together on this and help me out on the payment terms, help me out on everything, on the price, and together we'll make a good business. And sometimes that can go a long way. When you first do your first order, you want to do a low MOQ. MOQ stands for minimum order quantity. And so you want to actually try to do something like 500 to 1,000 ideally. It depends on your niche and what you need, but typically start a little bit lower just to get the ball rolling. A lot of times smaller factories will let you do smaller MOQs. So the big factories, you're just a little fly in the ointment. But sometimes the smaller factories are willing to work with you more. So don't be afraid to use small factories over the big, huge factories where you're just going to be just lost as another number. If at all possible, at some point in your process in the first year or two, try to visit your factory in China or Vietnam or India. It goes such a long way. Or at least tell them, hey, I'm planning on visiting. This is our first order, but I'm looking forward to one day coming and visiting you. It'll go a long way. In China especially, they like to use WeChat. So WeChat or WhatsApp are the two apps that are pretty much used outside the United States for conversation. So make sure you download WeChat. If you're going to deal with any Chinese supplier, they'll prefer to do anything and almost everything through WeChat. And monitor the exchange rates. Sometimes they'll quote you in US dollars, but they're paying in RMBs. And the RMB rate is kind of fixed to the dollar in some ways. The Chinese government kind of tightly controls it, but it does fluctuate. And sometimes that fluctuation can make a huge difference, and they don't adjust. They don't adjust the conversion. So sometimes they might price it now as at one conversion rate, but the rate goes down in your favor 6 months from now, and it's still at that same rate. So you're technically paying more. They're making more money from you than what they should be. So monitor those rates as well. So those are some things that you got to think about when you're looking for your supplier. Hopefully this is giving you a lot of insight and things to do. Now, what's going to happen next, you're going to see in the next module, is you can see Bradley from Helium 10, and he's going to be walking you through a whole bunch of the tools for Helium 10 and how to actually use these tools to find product ideas, to find opportunities, and to even potentially find suppliers. Some of those tools include like a Black Box, which is a great tool for keyword and product research. You'll be able to find competitors. There's tools like Trendster that will show you, overlays Google Trend data and will show you what's trending. It'll show you how to use the Chrome extension X-Ray which is an extension that sits in the Chrome browser on top of Amazon as you're searching Amazon, and we'll pull up all kinds of data on how much people are selling and where the opportunities are, review counts and graphs and everything. It'll show you how to use that in conjunction with Alibaba and how to source things onto Alibaba. Show you how to check demand on everything, how to do profitability with the profitability calculator, and how to get insights with the review insights on different products. So Bradley's going to walk you through quickly how to use the Helium 10 tools. It's going to be a valuable resource and valuable information. So make sure you don't skip that part, because it's going to help you a lot in your journey and picking products to start making money on Amazon. We'll see you again shortly in the next module.